Well, I have a really, really great guest here today, one that I've been looking forward to having on the show for a long time. Dana Nedrolo. I hope I got that last name correct. You are a Bigfoot researcher and you have some really outstanding new experiences to share with our audience. So I'm just going to let you take over and tell us what you found it lately.
Okay, thank you. I was just asked by Anita Collier a couple years ago to come down and speak at her Alabama conference, which I did on June 6th and 7th. We were together. 7th on Saturdays when we executed her conference. And on the way down, I had a chance to meet some wonderful people and friends that have been long-term buddies for perhaps a decade. And so I stayed there first. And then I went over and executed her deal and then got to meet quite a few people there. And then from there, I went up into Tennessee and worked with a friend who has had activity for about 3 years. And he's had a couple visuals there. And after that, I went up to meet a mother daughter team, friends of mine in northern Indiana. And this isn't far from Ohio or Michigan. And luckily, um, very unusual situation. I just happened to be sitting there after supper, and I happened to look out the window and see the husband walk by. But he looked a little unusual. He was wearing reddish brown, and he walked quickly. And I had 1, 2, 3 seconds, and he was gone. And I'm like, huh, kind of unusual. There had been footprints on the property, vocalizations on the property, and I thought, well, here comes the husband. We'll talk to him. He comes in wearing a green shirt, and I'm like, wait a minute. And so I asked the wife to go out and walk along the path that I saw the individual walk, and I couldn't see her. And the window I was looking through was slatted with, the front with blinds, and so I had a situation where I could look out and see the height of things. Well, there were flowers that this individual walked by, and he was taller than the flowers. He was on the fourth slat, and the flowers are at the second slat. So then I went out and had her look, and all she could see was the top of my cap. I walked over to the flowers, and here they are over 7 feet up in the air. And this individual was lanky, uh, lean, fast. I couldn't see all of it from maybe the hips up, and it had a pointed head rather than a round head, so cone if you like, and short hair, 60 feet out, and that was my visual first daytime. But I've had others in the past working with Shane Carpenter and Randy Harrington and Gary Schutte down in the Ozarks. In 2019, I was down there and had two visuals of an individual peeking around a tree. And I'll go ahead and elaborate on that. I'm sure Shane has talked to you in the past about his experience. From my take, that one was really interesting because he ended up walking up on the individual. And what was really nice too was Sibylla Christine Irwin had an illustration from Oklahoma that I consider one of her most important illustrations because when she did it, she was on the phone talking with the individual who had the observation, approximately a 6 foot male peeking around a tree, and he was able to look at her, or he was able, the observer was able to look at him and describe all the characteristics to Spilla over the phone. So she had a live on contact in exchange regarding description and illustration. And Shane felt that that drawing was the closest to what he had seen. The individual that he had seen, that I got to see through Randy's night vision, was approximately 150 pounds, 5.5 feet tall, and had a footprint of approximately 10 1/4 inches, or that's very close. And Shane had many footprint casts of an individual similar to him and this one. So there's continued research there.
Oh,
I'll
that
let you I'll let you jump in and guide whatever you'd like.
exactly. Yeah, Shane just has a remarkable story to tell. I interviewed him really early on when I was starting this Bigfoot
Right.
podcast channel, and yeah, and it's ongoing. It's just ongoing down there. It seems like everyone continually has experiences when they're out there with Shane.
Oh, absolutely. I've had rocks thrown at me, never hit. And we've gotten the vocalizations down there, the footprints, and there's been numerous interactions. And as the last I heard, we have a male down there with a 16-inch plus footprint, and a female at last we measured was 14. Last time I talked to Shane about it, she may be pushing 15 by now. And then we had a youngster with a 6-inch, and we had yet another 10-inch plus individual that in late 23 was punching tracks all over. How big he is now, I'm not sure. I will be in touch with Shane more as we go, and this is an amazing continued uh, forward study. So,
Yeah,
uh,
he's kind of on the leading edge of getting, the most evidence that I see out there, it seems like.
well, I'll tell you, the footprint capability from that study is tremendous, and there's been interactions and rock exchanges and the vocalization recordings, and they've gotten a few things on video too. So that's really nice. But there's no question as to what it is. There's no question as to uh, the accuracy and the detail that Shane is getting from that site. So it is certainly one of our highlights that's currently going on in the study of this subject matter.
How
Um,
did how did you get started with this? How did you get interested in the whole Bigfoot
I
phenomenon?
was 10 years old when my fifth grade teacher mentioned the word abominable snowman. And I'm like, you've got to be kidding me. So, and I knew I was going to be a herpetologist. I knew I was going to be a professional photographer. I didn't know that I was going to be involved in a Sasquatch mystery. And so the first thing that happened was I was hitting encyclopedias and picking up the information on Shipton and Himalayas and Yeti. And that happened to be the year we got the Patty 67 film. And my goodness, it's in North America. You've got to be kidding me. I don't have to go to Asia. And I was a vertebrate zoologist early on, studying every animal on Earth as hard and as fast as I could. I'm a macro photographer, so I'm interested in invertebrates as well and getting professional pictures of each and every thing that I encounter when I can. Well, uh, my interest and fascination in great apes natural made me a natural for this, and so I started grabbing every piece of literature I could find on cryptozoology and the Bernard Havelman's book and Ivan T. Sanderson and eventually John Green. Now the problem was I couldn't find adults to talk to about this subject seriously, and so I ended up going on and getting a degree in wildlife biology. Wildlife emphasis, major in biology, zoology, vertebrate zoology was my focus. I had a museum techniques minor, so I was looking at archives and being able to verify things and document, particularly with camera. But I'll be teaching a Sasquatch footprint casting uh, exercise with Barnaby Jones in the near future. That'll be May 9 next year, and so one thing led to another. But what was interesting was I had an experience at a church camp 2 years later, uh, and we had large vocalizations, hissing, and something large was in the edge of the lake. It wouldn't come out. We had all kinds of flashlights on it, and what was interesting was it just wouldn't come out, but the volume, the sound it was making, I couldn't figure out what kind of is that a black bear? That's about my only option. And the more I studied vocals, the more I studied bears, and the more I studied other animals, the more questionable this became. And I didn't get a verification until I'd hooked up with the Michigan Reporting Project, Jim and Stacy Flowers, for example, and they had recordings that were similar to what I'd heard that year back in, I believe it was seventh grade. So I was launched, And I started picking up every book and every magazine that I could find associated with the subject. But again, I couldn't find anybody to talk to about it. And this went on in my 20s. And finally, I met a man, Alan Blake Sheldon, who was open to it. And he became my photo partner, and we traveled all over the United States. We did not have Sasquatch experiences, interestingly enough, not until after about 2000, maybe 2010 was our first one, which is interesting because I'd found a private property to study locally that had activity. And although I didn't get a visual, I did get footprints. I got vocalizations. And one of the highlights was when I came back from being burned, I'd had a 17-day in a hospital after a surgery in 2018, skin graft surgery. And I came back, and on the trading block of whatever it was I was trading with was burdock. And burdock, if you look it up, the roots were torn off, and the roots were one of the capabilities of the roots was cancer um, inhibition. In other words, something that could fight against that. And they were ripped off. So my take was I didn't need it. Thank you. But the burdock was for topical use, especially burns. Did they smell that? That's been one of my questions. Um,
So that,
since
so
then,
you think that there was some interaction or communication between you and them?
well, what I had going was we were exchanging things on the trading block. They would bring up mossy rocks from the creek and put them on a rock wall. Uh, there were little things that were going on with coins and rocks and bricks and things that trinkets that I would exchange with. They would take apples. I would get recordings, but I never got a visual. Um, Interesting. Some of the best tracks that I got were in 22 inches of snow, straight line tracks with 5.5 to 6 feet in between each punch, going straight from the stream. And they came out to the road and then backtracked. Um,
Had they,
so
had they ever brought to you any other plants before? Was this an isolated incident
this
where
was an isolated event, and it happened to coincide right when I was burned. So I found that very, very intriguing. And that
yeah,
opened up the doors to many, many other experiences in many other states, including Georgia, Colorado, Idaho, Minnesota, Wisconsin here, also Missouri. So, in
yeah,
Arkansas.
yeah.
So, and I can go over some of those events. I didn't, I haven't got many visuals. I haven't been afraid of them. I've never had a reason to be. I enjoy the loud vocalizations, and quite often I'm studying right now with Fred Rohl, just all the reports that he has on Alaska, because Alaska has such a uh, mm, a tint, kind of a tainted view of their aggressiveness. But I wanted to know, out of all the reports Fred had, he has 275 reports. How many of those reports resulted in damage to vehicles versus houses or housing? A lot more damage to the housing. You know, when people leave, they seem to come in and break doors and things like that. Um, but what was interesting was, out of all those experiences, there was one snowmobile picked up, twisted, and flipped vertically into a snowbank. There was a sled that was thrown like a frisbee 35, 40 yards, or at least feet, might have been yards, into a lake. It was heavy. And then there were other things where you'd expect them to break, but they haven't. But there were a few snowmobiles that had the runners, or the basically the rubber running the snowmobile was taken off the track, so that had to be readjusted. But it was amazing how little damage. It's almost as though they're saying, okay, we don't want you here, get out of here, we're going to yell at you, scream at you, throw things at you, intimidate you, escort you out of the way, but we want you out of here. And so very few people, at least in these reports, were actually hurt, although there was one incident where an individual was shot at, and that took a birch tree, jammed it through a 18 by 18-inch window, and anybody standing in front of there would have been taken out. And then it pulled it out. So that's kind of like my take on what had happened up in Alaska. Um, we had some fellows up there, Alexander Petaklov and the Small Town Monster Unit were working with a local man up there who was a commercial pilot, and he opened his property up to them throughout a field season. And what was I asked a number of the guys, how often did you smell something really bad? Not one of them picked up any odor whatsoever. So that tells me that the individuals on the property that were messing around with them weren't stressed, weren't exuding horrible odors, and it was a nice general series of interactions. One being, for example, having a outdoor house with a door being propped open. In other words, the guys that shut it, they'd come back and it'd be propped open. There'd be slams on the house. There'd be handprints on the windows. There would be footprints or vocalizations, big rocks thrown at the vehicles or boats. Nobody's getting hurt. Nobody's getting intimidated. So they're not all bad up there. And I think if obviously if you intimidate or shoot back, now you're probably upping the uh, aggression aspect. And it's been stated, are they possibly mimicking or mirroring our behavior? So if we're nice and kind and sweet and happy, maybe they're more likely to be that way. We do believe that they read our behavior, maybe read our actions, and some people claim mental telepathy. Uh, is mental telepathy real? Apparently so. How familiar people are with it? Not. Is it generally accepted? No. And so when you talk to people, it's amazing who will tell you, yes, I experienced this, but don't tell anybody. So we have a long way to go on this subject matter. And I think it's going to be real interesting as each year goes by, as more people open the communication. I'll be starting a podcast in the future myself with a witness interactions. And then I also want to interview uh, wildlife biologists around the world who are working with different species to incorporate what methods and techniques they use, and possibly incorporate that into what we're doing with our target species here in North America.
Exactly. I want to go back to something you said earlier when you heard and saw some volume of something down in the water, and it was just, you said, just an unbelievably large sound. What did that sound like?
Uh, yeah, refresh me on exactly what we were talking about there. I just
Um,
covered a lot of ground.
you mentioned being somewhere kind of early on in your life where there
Oh,
was something down in a lake or
yeah,
something.
yeah, yeah,
And
yeah,
it
yeah.
was just
Sure.
you said it was just a really, really phenomenal sound, and you couldn't figure out what could possibly make that sound. What
Well,
did
I can tell you exactly what it sounded like. If you were to go online and listen to Apituophis, which is a bull snake genus, bull and pine snakes, they have a little piece of skin over their glottis which vibrates when they exhale a lot of air. And when they hiss, it just makes an incredible. But this was so loud, it was unbelievable. And that's where I was shocked because it's like, well, it's obviously not a snake, and it's obviously a large mammal. What is doing this? And that's pretty much it. And it went on for several minutes, you know, and I'm just standing there in awe because I can't believe what I'm hearing in association with the splashing and bear you'd anticipate you could see. You know, they don't really seem to hide behind cover all the time. They're pretty bold. They run, they're out, they're moving from point A to point B. That's not always true. I scared up a bear cub once and he jumped in front of me and I could hear mama and she didn't come out. But, you know, there's so many different situations. But that was pretty much the description. But there was loud splashing and it just did not come out from behind the cover. So
Yeah, exactly. On the Alaska aggression, have you heard of anything like that in other parts of the country? Or is that mostly isolated to the Alaska experience?
oh, the aggression I talked about?
Yes.
Oh, I think certain individuals report it from time to time in the South. I had one report out of Florida where a police officer did some tracking, took his German Shepherd with him, and unfortunately, the Shepherd didn't make it. And the individual that he was trying to track came around behind him, went back to the police car, rolled up the hood of the vehicle, and when he came back, the vehicle was fine, except the hood was all rolled up, just like lefsa or something that you would just roll up, like a tarp or sleeping bag.
Take an unbelievable amount of strength to do that, I would think.
Exactly. But then we start looking at the tree formations that are associated with them. And if there's no equipment and you're in the outback and there are footprints, we're pretty well led to believe that they're manipulating trees. How are they doing this? Some of those trees are being pushed over, allegedly, supposedly. People are saying I've heard trees fall in the forest, one right after another in one location that I monitor. And I don't have an explanation for what kind of strength they have, except that it's immense. And if gorillas carry the strength that they do, and we're dealing with something that may be 10 feet tall and perhaps pushing double the mass of the gorilla, I'm not sure we understand the strength capability that they have. And also, are there other things going on that we're not privy to at this point in time? That quantum physics continues to come up, and of course, controversial and not generally accepted by everyone. There are things that we will continue to learn about in the future that we don't understand now.
Exactly.
Whether that's their odor projection, whether that's the way they affect our batteries with our equipment. I've had a couple of digital recorders go zzz, zzz, and then heard wood knocks right after it. And that came right after I smelled flowers in winter, 2 days after Christmas in southeastern Wisconsin. And The temperature was 22 degrees and the winds were 15 miles an hour. And I have no source for that flower scent at all. We saw an orb after that, a bright blue one. And there were other situations there that were associated with what we would call Sasquatch.
Yeah,
Do we
there
understand everything? No, we've got a long way to go.
there are so many stories that I've heard. I used to be a UFO researcher,
Oh
and
my.
I'm an intuitive and understand a bit about kind of the quantum physics aspects of some life experiences, and certainly have had many of my own kind of synchronistic and intuitive experiences to not doubt that some of that certainly is very, very prominent and real. You mentioned the orb. Can you tell me where were you when you saw that?
I was in a Kettle Moraine at a private property um, with a friend, and it was the first one and the only one that I've ever seen to date so far. But I take all kinds of reports. I see them referred to quite often, and I know it wasn't too long ago that Mr. Matthew Moneymaker made reference to them. Uh, and of course, many people are like, "Well, about time." So, but it's there are things going on we don't understand, and there are continued, you know, groups of people that are picking up evidence. Now we have David Zegan, and forgive me if I pronounce your name wrong, Dave, um, and he's a CSI forensic scientist who's trying to up the ante with modern techniques. We've got Darby Orcutt over at North Carolina, and they're working on DNA. And of course, we've had the works of Melba Ketchum, and we've got the works of uh, uh, Jeff Meldrum and so many other people that are privately behind the scenes doing things. This isn't going to go away. It's just going to continue to advance as we learn more. And the wonderful uh, Doug Hychek up in Minnesota, I'll be meeting with him in the near future. He's of course bringing things to the forefront publicly, and Matt or Matt Moneymaker having put out the Finding Bigfoot show, that certainly opened up the public to having a place to bring their reports. And of course, you've got Wes over at Sasquatch Chronicles, and now things are getting logged and compared. Of course, one of the bad things that goes with that is now there's so much more information, things are much easier faked. So hopefully people will have a filter while they're working working through this and pay attention to potential secondary evidence, likelihoods, and things like that. So,
Yeah, exactly. So, given your education, your background, your ability to research maybe with a little bit more refined technique of observation, how do you think that has helped you in your Bigfoot research?
well, it's kind of funny because when I started, I was just like every available piece of literature that I could find, I would just suck up and absorb and continue to read it. And literally, it became my Bible at the time because I was really, really, really involved with it. I ended up in the BFRO in 2000. My sister made a bet with me after my mom died, and that was, I bet you won't get online and research these things in the network, and I bet that you won't become computer literate. Well, you can't let your little sister win a bet. So I ended up in the BFRO after nagging them a little bit with questions, and they found out about my background. So I was there for 4 years. That helped significantly because I got to meet some of the people like John Green, who had interested me in the subject in the first place with their book writings. One thing led to another, and I began to realize I was maybe a little more unorthodox and full of too much energy and had too many questions. So over time, I just backed off and eventually became an independent. I backed out of this for about 4 years publicly, and then went behind the scenes. I was invited to a private property in Georgia who had activity down there. And I got to see some of my first footprints then. That was in 2008. I was in the BFRO from 2000 to 2004. I met some wonderful people, still stay in contact with them. And that has led to so many more meetings with other BFRO people who are also very wonderful. And of course, every organization varies in who's in it and how they operate. And we all have different personalities and conflicts and chemistries. So as a result, some folks don't work well together. But the key is in keeping it upbeat and looking for people that you do work well together with. And hopefully people are honest and you have a chance to advance. And that was my byline. And that's what I went with and still do today. And I'm looking to meet as many people and talk to as many people as I can across the entire country, but I'm also including Africa, Asia, Australia, and Europe.
Well, it sounds like you have a broad plan. Have you ever been up to the Olympic project, seen those big nests?
Not yet. The guys have invited me up there. I've been going to interview Shane Corson, and John Pickering has been a friend of mine from the past, and some of the other fellows. Uh, but I haven't got there yet. I did. I am a member of Legacy Discoveries, which is Angelique and her son Mitch uh, Benham and Mitch Wiley, her son. They have had ongoing interactions with the big guys. And so I got in the field up there with her some. There was some potential mental telepathy going on, which I found extremely interesting. And I kind of got a phone call on my way out of there by a good friend of mine, Keith Bearden. And he explained to me he had just gotten off the phone with Ron Moorhead. He began to talk to me about things, vibration, energy, and structures and things of that nature, which was very interesting because what he told me paralleled what we were told by an entity up over in Idaho. Now, most people wouldn't believe any of that, and I
What
completely
did you hear?
understand it.
What was that telepathic message that you heard?
It was an ongoing situation, and all I can tell you really is that there were questions about how can we increase communication, how can we do better regarding learning more, how can we do things uh, like finding you easier, things of that nature. And what was comical about that was there were answers. Now, at the end of the exchange, I asked, could you give us a validation call when we're done? And we got a whistle and a bird call afterwards. Now, I don't hear that well, and I don't claim anything regarding telepathy. But the gals I was working with did. They were shocked and amazed. So I think this is something that needs to be looked into more. And, you know, I think we need to know more about what we are, as humans, are capable of, regarding our senses and how we can up our senses. And that was one of the things that was talked about. I need to spend more time in the woods sharpening my senses and becoming more in touch with the things around me. And apparently that makes me more capable of being able to work with them. And I'm going to put that into a exercise in the near future as I go approach some friends who have activity up toward Canada in Minnesota. And we'll see how that goes. They've had ongoing things for 13 years. And there are numerous people involved. Doug Hychek has covered the area, and there are numerous. There's actually a book been written on its private property. But then we have Michael Hexum, who works with Abe Del Rio up in Minnesota. And these fellows are also coming up with things not too far away from there, and numerous other people. So I think we have networks and waves of people in so many areas experiencing so many things. So as Dave Zegan would suggest, we need to do a much better job documenting our experiences, trying to document tracks have been kind of looked at as a trophy. What can we learn from them? How can we need more photographs of them in the field. Cliff Barackman has a technique that he uses and recommends to people, and that would be when you take the pictures of the tracks, take a wide variety of them from different angles, maybe different lenses, also with a flash, and then natural light. And that way, at least some of those pictures are going to be better than others, and that might help you capture more detail. And obviously, we want to measure things like stride and length of the foot and the width of the foot and comment on the substrate and things of that nature. But there's a good deal there's large numbers of people that see tracks and like, whatever, it's tracks. And we don't get that information. Some of us have traveled a long ways for good tracks.
Exactly. Have you heard about the just one foot, a track, but it only includes maybe the right foot or the left foot, and you don't get the other foot? Have you heard of that before?
I have. I think there's a couple things to consider. Are there trees nearby? Because one of the methods that we seem to have encountered is when they push off, they'll often flip to a tree. When I say flip, I mean jump or leap, and one foot will go to the base of the tree rather than the substrate and bounce off the tree or tree root and then go to the next tree. So now, if there are no trees, that of course leaves us with what's going on. Well, uh, it, most people probably aren't aware of how wide they could possibly jump, how far they could jump. We had an individual with nearly 20-inch sized feet standing on a log in Colorado, described to me by Michael Johnson. And he said that this individual just leaped and it was 20 feet before he hit the ground. Now that's from a standing. So if they're running, how far can they actually go? How far can they leap? How far can they jump out of a tree? I mean, people describe them jumping out of trees 30 feet or more, 40 feet, 50 feet. Most of this doesn't even sound real. But I can say when I was in eighth grade, 10th grade, we did a lot of haying, and it'd be hot summer July. We'd stack those bales on those wagons as high as we could and just jump off them for fun. So I know I was pushing 20 feet jumping off the top of these wagons. And if I can do that, what in the world are they capable of?
Exactly. Yeah, especially with the level of strength that they have.
Right. Now, there's backtracking on trails. And of course, are there things going on where all of a sudden they vanish or just disappear? That's well beyond my capability of understanding. So I'm not one to comment on that. All I know is that I do question the observer and how closely things have been checked, because if they're jumping 20, 25 feet or more from the last track, have you looked at all those possible areas? Because maybe they can jump to the side or, who knows? There's more questions than answers, but the beauty of it is we're all working together toward the same goal, and that is to understand them and hopefully respectfully so that in the future when, more information comes up, we handle it wisely. And
Exactly.
with our track record, there's a question there. So there are many people that are very concerned that maybe it's good that they stay, hidden and uncovered. On the other hand, we've got a lot of people with trauma, and we'd sure like to help them out too. And by
That's
validating them as a real species, that could go away. That's a positive thing for those folks.
That's true. Yeah, I remember doing an interview once with someone who was a clinical psychologist about the trauma that this can cause, and it really can cause PTSD. I mean, it's something that it's difficult to process when you don't believe it's an actual real thing. And if you believe it's an actual real thing, then the rest of the world maybe doesn't believe it's an actual real thing. And it can just cause a lot of confusion, a lot of fear, and a lot of trauma for some people. And other people just, move on out there into the woods and do more research.
Well, sure, exactly. I mean, a sidebar on the Sasquatch situation is all the variations of their look. Some of them looking like people, some of them looking like cavemen, some of them looking like apes, and of course, quite often we have references to dogmen, and now that kind of was like a big slam on our science because you don't get a hybrid canine primate. However, we do have baboons, which are dog-faced monkeys. And I have several people that have told me they felt like they saw a baboon. So I'm not sure, but I wouldn't be surprised if this continent has large baboons, and they might be a source for some of the dogman sightings. Um, some of the dogman sightings may be well out of the realm that I'm looking at or studying. Uh, and some of my close friends claim visuals, but um, we get scared easy, and we don't have a handle on each and every thing that's out there. But I've found in my case, I've got my hands full with just Sasquatch alone. So
Exactly. Going back to the structures, we talked a little bit about the Olympic nest, and you mentioned earlier about seeing fairly large, good-sized trees, maybe just broken over or whatever, not necessarily caused by a storm. But have you seen any more elaborate structures that have been built out there in the woods without
yeah, actually, when we were in Indiana, we were driving around looking at some, and Um, interesting enough, I don't have an answer as to how they're being built. It would take immense strength to do some of the things that we're seeing. And of course, people are photographing them in virtually every location that they're claiming Sasquatches, and especially the ones that have other secondary evidence to go with them, such as footprints, or people have got a visual, or there's carcasses, or there's hair, or there's scat, things of that nature. Uh, we've got asterisks, we've got X's. Those are popularly described and commonly described. And we've got, of course, incredible structures like teepees, and so many of it. Many people would say, "Well, that's the scouts, or that's a survival group, etc." And so I'm very interested in learning more about these things and uh, potential differences. So, but I don't have an answer regarding the strength aspect of how some of these things are created if it's not done by human equipment.
What about sounds like I mean, I've interviewed a few people, not very many, but a few people who have been out in a very, very remote area. Would not be anything electrical anywhere in the vicinity. And they hear something that sounds like a machine or a drill or something that just it's ongoing. It's not just a single sound that they hear. Have you heard of anything like that, or have you personally heard anything like that?
I haven't, but there numerous contacts have, and we've gotten all kinds of mechanical equipment sounds, clicking, buzz, all kinds of sounds like that. I don't know if they are imitating that. I don't know if there's something else going on, but I do know it's associated with some of the calls that some people have heard. Now, we do know that they're very, very well, allegedly, we know that they're very, very good mimics, and people have heard their names called in the same town. I've got or in the same sound or the same type of vocal as their mate or friend, family member. I've got a friend out in North Carolina, and she and her husband both hear um, the other person calling them. I have a friend who, when she was raising her children, she said, "Okay, kids, if you hear me call you from the woods, don't come to me unless you see me first." So we know they have incredible fine-tuned capability uh, to mimic our sounds. And there's been all kinds of crazy things that have happened, like somebody in their tent and they hear a forest literally being bulldozed. It is just being smashed and destroyed, and they're terrified because they're afraid of a tree fall on their tent or whatever, and then hearing growls and screams and roars and hoping that the sound maker does not come over to their tent and literally destroy the tent or them. And then they get up in the morning and they look outside and there's nothing wrong. Everything's just fine. What just happened?
Exactly.
So
And how much can we trust our own five senses, in situations like that?
that's
Um,
another point, and there's everything from missing time to people that have had one-on-ones and they can't remember what happened and things like that. So I think we probably have some sort of a stress overload where all of a sudden we literally shut down. So especially when things are traumatic, and if you've got a giant ape man who shows himself and starts making facial expressions and approaches you and comes in real close, yeah, that's pretty traumatic for somebody, especially who doesn't believe that they're even possible in the first place. And in talking with different people, I know people that have had one on ones, literally from 4 or 5 feet away, where people sitting in their vehicle and they turn their head right up against the glass. Here's a face looking at them, and it's virtually almost always curiosity. you know it's also interesting how fast these emotions can go on and off, screams and roars of aggression and all of a sudden quiet, and all of a sudden it's like it never happened. Now it's like curious, a few sniffs in the air and looking around, and then okay, and then turn around and walk away, just like nothing happened. So there's a lot of it's funny because there's so much parallel behavior, but yet on the other hand, nobody's filled out a contract stating exactly what's going to happen. So we do have an incredible mystery.
That's true. Well, talking with Ron Moorhead and interviewing him about the Sierra Sounds and also Scott Nelson, interesting things happened up there, just as you were saying, the sounds outside the camp, thinking they would get up the next day and it would just be a demolished campsite and absolutely nothing was gone. But also,
Exactly.
Ron mentioned one point up there where they got that remarkable Sierra sounds. If you haven't, anyone out in the audience that hasn't heard those, go listen to them. But he also suggested or told us at one time they were there and this enormous really dark blue UFO that was just huge was overhead. Have you heard of that around or have you experienced anything like that, a UFO?
I haven't, but other people have. There was a fellow named Stan. I forgot his last name at the moment. He's got a book on it out in Pennsylvania in the 70s.
Yeah,
He was
Gordman,
with,
I believe is his name. Stan Gordman.
I think so.
Mhm.
Anyway, I know Eric Altman knows him well out in Pennsylvania. And there were associations of Sasquatches and UFOs. In other words, there'd be a ship and then there'd be a Sasquatch. And I don't know anything about that. And I haven't got a chance to talk to Stan yet, but I would like to do that eventually. And there are other people that have had experiences that suggest that they could be somehow associated. I have no idea. That's outside. I'm looking at this from a naturalist slash biologist position. So I'm looking at, behavior ethology. I'm looking at uh, the field sign that they leave behind, the behavior, and the everything anecdotal, which can lead to secondary evidence. And so you know, as I said, we've got an incredible mystery. Some people jump to conclusions about things sometimes, and it's really hard to know. It's really hard to explain one unknown situation with another unknown situation. As far as ETs go, I've had friends that have told me some experiences, and we've got information online, and we've got all kinds of claims. So who knows what's going on there? That's not my specialty, so I'll just smile and sit back and enjoy it as entertainment, and continue working with the big hairy folk.
Well, you hinted earlier at, when you're doing research, talking to someone, they're sharing their experience to you, you have to take into account the person that you're talking to and the way that they may experience things. But another thing that by and large, I have found since I live in such a bizarre kind of non-reality world half the time, um, meaning that, with intuition, remote viewing, things like that, perceiving things with
Sure.
the five senses, I think we also have to look at how the human nature of perception works. It's not just a matter of, is it spot on or is it off in that we're perceiving something in a wrong fashion? But it's a matter of some people perceive perhaps more in-depth things than other people do.
Totally agree. Totally agree. I mean, I don't have great eyesight. I have pretty lousy hearing. And I ruined my smell or olfactory a long time ago in calf pens with ammonia. So skunk is actually pleasant to me. Um, what's one person's pleasure or treasure is somebody else's horror, you know. So if you can't understand or don't believe that these things are real, when I say these things, I'm talking about Sasquatch, um, and you see one, I would think that what that does to your psyche and your uh, you know ability to understand would probably be just in shock. Um, as far as people being out in the field and continuing their interactions with forest creatures of all kinds, certainly our capability to see, guess, learn, understand, repeat experiences grows. And uh, we've got so many philosophies. Some people have to go to the forest with a rifle or a gun as protection. Some people are incredibly terrified of many wild creatures. I'm a herpetologist, so I happen to enjoy and really am comfortable with rattlesnakes. Other people, you mention the word, and they're out the back door and in another county. Same situation with cougar. Same situation with black bear, grizzlies especially. I'm not a grizzly or a bull shark fan, but the more I learn about them, the less fear I have. Although I'll leave the marine work for others. Uh, but just exactly as what you said, we've got so many personalities, so many takes, so many experiences, and we have to allow for all that and try to work in such a way that we can all benefit.
That's absolutely true. Do you think the patty film is the best evidence we have on film?
I'm not sure because I don't know what all other films are out there. I do know that it's extremely helpful, especially with the 14 and a half inch footprints that were taken by Bob Titus, Titus, back in the day. Um, it's extremely interesting that vid has maintained its clarity and dominance for so long, and that certainly suggests something. Having interviewed Bob Gimlin a number of times, I feel comfortable that he's an honest man. I don't see a suit that somebody has come up with that says here it is, and all attempts to suggest that something is the suit has been ridiculous. Um, uh, Jeff Meldrum has a very good take on the vid, and I think numerous other people do as well. Now, what vids are out there privately, I don't know. I do know that we have tremendous vocalizations recordings, so the Sierra sounds don't stand alone. There are others that are similar that haven't been made public that eventually will. There are, I'm sure, other private videos that are out there that may challenge the Patty video. There was, when I was working in Oklahoma, we were working with pheromones in 2001. And that was one of my first field trips with the BFRO. And The guys that I was working with had come into contact with a video from a local casino in Oklahoma that apparently the surveillance camera was 10 feet up, and or I don't know how tall, how what the height was on it, but it picked up an individual at a garbage location, and apparently it was an incredibly sharp video. So that may well have outdone it. Supposedly the video disappeared and was taken by somebody, and it never surfaced publicly. But what other videos out there are there like that? Are
Yeah,
there like that? So
exactly. And that's very unfortunate. That would have been a valuable thing, but may have been why it also disappeared. What do you think? What do you think Bigfoot is? What is your honest opinion about what you think Bigfoot is?
that's a great question and one I can't answer, but I can answer this. Why are we so convinced that all of them are exactly the same?
Hmm.
I'm not convinced of that. I think some of them have special capabilities that have been. A friend of mine, Angie Williamson, describes it as, as human beings, we've seemed to have lost some of our capacity to be able to do some of the things that we could do in the past. Now, that might include remote viewing. It might include mental telepathy. It might not. But what else could we do that when we were sharp, and now we're being domesticated in, you know, tight schedules, a lot of stress. We're not in the nature much anymore for the most of us, and so there's questions about that. There's questions about why do they look so different? How can we have some that are very, very, very human-like, look like Caucasian people, some of them Native American people, and they look almost exactly like human faces. And then we have others that look very Neanderthal, Cro-Magnon, caveman, troglodyte, etc. And then we have others that look literally ape. When Barb Shoop saw her first one, she told me, I couldn't figure out how this gorilla got loose. And an illustration done by an artist of what she saw looks very, very, very mountain gorilla with a sagittal crest and the big brow and I mean, just literally, obviously, that's an ape. And yet there are others that have narrower feet that are much more human-like. So what are they? Are they a combination of hybrids? You know, and can the AP ones hybridize with the more human-type ones? I don't know. And is there some outside force that's associated with this phenomena that has actually done DNA manipulation, resulting in things? I don't know. You start getting into the history of mankind and all the aliens and stuff on, or all the alien questions. It brings up a lot of unknowns, and things aren't necessarily what we were taught when we were growing up. Um, it's really hard to know. So it's a great question that remains. As the DNA starts coming in, and we eventually refine our techniques and methods so that we get good samples and we get a better insight to what's available. Hopefully, perhaps we'll have more information.
I'm sure we will. But I think that's a good point that some people have seen them and they look more ape-like. Some people see them, they look more human-like. I know not far from where I live, there's a farm back in, I think it was the 70s or 80s. And a farmer kept talking about seeing these two, probably juvenile Bigfoot, but he said, they look monkey-like. And they
Mm-hmm.
couldn't figure out what they were, but they were large. They were much larger than a regular monkey-like, or an ape-like. Um, so he would tell the community, but everyone started trying to figure out what zoo possibly something escaped from, rather than to have in their mind at that time that possibly this was a natural being in the forest, maybe a Bigfoot. And then the farmer across the street from this guy, he started seeing the same thing in an area where we did Byways of Bigfoot, the film, and found evidence, and many people have seen along that riverway Bigfoot experiences there. So yeah, I think that that's really very interesting. So in conclusion, tell me what has been the most outstanding encounter that impressed you the most that you've personally had?
Well, working with Shane and Randy Harrington and Gary Schutte in the Ozarks allowed me to have some experiences that were rather interesting and amazing on the night that we scared up the youngster that Shane walked in on 7 to 8 feet away, and getting rocks thrown and hearing vocalizations and seeing the footprints and the casts that the fellows have made. That's probably my number one. The I'm anticipating something very interesting as I go on this Canadian or northern Minnesota trip up toward Canada. We have 13 years of interactions up there. The man that's working with this has been given like 30 some deer skulls. They put them on his deer stand. They bring them to his home, and I'm anticipating. He promised me he's going to set me up so that I'll have experiences that will exceed what I experienced in Missouri. So I'll keep to date on that. I'll let you know as if I survive that ordeal. So
Sounds good. Sounds good. So tell us about this podcast you're starting. Where is it going to be? Do you have a name for it yet? How can we find it?
at this point in time, just check in with me at Dana Nedrelo, Dana Nedrelo. That's my timeline or that's my Facebook profile. I haven't got it set up yet. We're in the process. I'm working with Loriana Diwali, who has worked with numerous other people, including she and I helped set Wes up with Sasquatch Chronicles. And so I'm going to her for this help, and we'll let you know when things get set up.
Sounds really good. Thank you so much for being with me today, and really super appreciate it. Also, I want to remind the audience to please like, share, and subscribe. When you subscribe, it really helps us keep the channel going and keeps us alive, and we can have great interviews like we did here with Dana today. So thank you so much.
All right. Well, thank you very much, and we'll be in touch.
Very good.